If I were to describe something as eco-friendly, sustainable, locally grown, biodegradable, 100% organic, what would come to your mind? For me, these words would elicit thoughts of raw fruits and vegetables. These would be good for the body, the mind, and the soul. However, these words are not descriptors of produce. In fact, these words are branded upon packs of cigarettes and canisters of smokeless tobacco. In order to maintain optimal health for our society, our government has the duty to expand the regulation on these types of advertisements, specifically in relation to targeting the adolescent population. Tobacco advertising includes any effort of the industry to sell their products to consumers. So this would include things like cigarettes, cigars, smokeless tobacco, and electronic cigarettes. And it infiltrates all types of media. It's found in TVs and magazines, and specifically I think the places where we buy these cigarettes, like the drugstore or the grocery store. And our kids are susceptible to this. American Spirit is specifically targeting the fact that Americans these days are very health conscious. So they put the slogan, "Natural tastes better," in their cigarette boxes. We also see phrases on e-cigarettes like, "Why quit smoking? Switch to blue," and "Freedom to smoke a cigarette without the guilt." Because they are claiming that their products are healthier because they don't contain toxic chemicals and they don't contain tobacco. However, is this really true? So my first argument is this: pro-tobacco advertisements increase youth susceptibility to begin smoking cigarettes. A study conducted and recorded in the Addictive Behaviors magazine verified that exposure to tobacco advertisements is associated with an increased initiation of tobacco use among individuals. That being said, there are nearly 1 million new smokers every single year, but almost half of those are minors. So studies have shown that the advertisements are actually encouraging youth to begin participating in consuming tobacco, not just the adults that are already using those products. And my point in this is that we are encouraging the youth and drawing them in with these advertisements. These advertisers are good. They depict smoking and they depict tobacco use as though it's a positive thing that's going to add to your life. It's going to give you friends. It's going to make you popular. It's going to make you feel good. You might feel a little high while you're doing it. But it's not showing the adverse effects, which include lung cancer, future health problems, increased risk for all sorts of diseases. And as a young adult, your brain is not fully developed yet. You don't have the capacity to understand that the choices you make now are going to impact your future. And so it's so important that we begin to place regulation on these types of advertisements so that the government doesn't have the ability to target this population. My second argument is this: there is an incredibly strong correlation between cigarette advertisements and an increased level of continued tobacco consumption by smokers. That means that the smokers and the users of tobacco that are already using and already smoking are going to continue to use the more that they see advertisements. Advertisements are not decreasing the amount of smokers, they're only increasing it. There's really no good that's coming out of it. So why should we let them continue to advertise? Well, tobacco companies argue that the goal of marketing is to increase the appeal of their individual cigarette brands to the smokers instead of the competitors. So that essentially those smokers and users of tobacco will either stick with their brand or switch to their brand instead of the other brands. However, studies have actually shown that tobacco marketing strategies only foster the perception that smoking is more acceptable. They're not, like I said before, doing any good in stopping the problem that is killing so many people. So instead of switching brands, smokers only end up continuing their choice to smoke. They don't stop. And so there are actually lots of counter arguments in place of this, and the main one is that the tobacco industry has a constitutional right to advertise its product freely. And they argue, those who are opposed to regulation would argue that it's not constitutional or legally acceptable to limit tobacco advertising. We have to give people the right to the freedom of press, the freedom of speech, all of these things that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights gave Americans. But I argue that the positive effects that would come from tobacco advertising regulation have an overall increase in the welfare of society and specifically the protection of our youth. And I think that that justifies this loss of freedom of expression for one industry. Tobacco advertising has a particularly detrimental effect on young adults, and we need to protect them. Young adults are already in an experimental age stage, and so when you add a factor in like cigarette smoking or tobacco use, they're gonna do it if it looks cool, if the advertisements make it look positive and not negative. And so a study by Day and Howe confirmed this positive correlation between increased tobacco advertising with increased use by adolescents. And that specifically is referring to e-cigarettes, which are the new thing these days. The adolescent population is already more susceptible to these methods because, like I said, of their experimental age stage. And so we're not helping the problem at all. So my ultimate argument is this: to maintain optimal health for our society, I believe the government needs to expand its tobacco advertising regulations. Like I said before, specifically in relation to the adolescent population. This expansion of regulations can look like the way that they're allowed to advertise, how much they're allowed to advertise, where they're allowed to advertise. It doesn't have to be completely shutting down their right to market their products, because I do believe they have a right to market their products, but I think it needs to be regulated more so that we are protecting our youth. And what this looks like could be all sorts of ways. So, the adolescent population is the population that is going to be responsible for the future decisions of our world. And any change that's really going to happen in this world has to begin with them. You have to start from the bottom in order to reach the top. The adolescent population holds the entire future of our world in their hands. They are our future leaders, our future lawmakers, our future decision makers. And they're also the future parents and example setters of this world. And do we want them to be setting the example that it's acceptable and it's healthy to smoke cigarettes and to use tobacco? No. So like I said, any change that's going to occur in our society has to start with them. And I think that tobacco advertising regulation needs to start at the lowest level, the adolescent population, and therefore, and by that, we will see change in this world. Thank you.